When it comes to effectively communicating your brand story to the world, there are a number of different ways that you can go. Obviously, the goal is to get your message out to as many people as possible so they can learn about who you are, what you do, and how you do it. The end goal is that you're helping people find solutions to their problems. And if you focus in on that, you can help provide a transformation that's going to make them want to come your way. Now, what ways can you go about amplifying that brand message? Well, you've got social media sites like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. You can build your presence on video sites like YouTube or TikTok. You can write blogs and contribute them to communities and spread them across the internet. You can start a podcast and use that platform to amplify your message on a global scale. You also have the ability to build an email list and communicate with your audience whenever you want to. Or maybe search engine optimization is more your speed, and getting quality content that ranks well and builds authority and drives traffic to your website is the way to go. These are all phenomenal strategies, and they're all very effective when they're executed properly. But today, I want to talk about a big one that many brands and many individuals are taking advantage of these days, and that's podcast guest marketing, or podcast guesting. Now, I mentioned a few minutes ago that starting a podcast is a great way to amplify your message, but if you don't want to do all that production work, being a value-driven podcast guest that contributes to all of the great shows that are out there is a tremendous way to build presence, build authority, grow your know, like, and trust factor, and so much more. My name is Jason Sircone, and I'm on a mission to bring purpose and clarity to podcast guest marketing and podcast guest optimization with this channel. To show your support, like the channel and click the bell so you're the first to know when new content goes live, and also give this video a thumbs up so more viewers like yourself can find it in the algorithm. So I wanted to take some time today and take it back to basics and talk about what podcast guest marketing actually is. Simply stated, podcast guest marketing means that you're finding shows that are relevant to your niche and your mission and your message, and you are booking guest appearances on those shows to come on and make an impact on the audience. Every time you go on a podcast that is relevant to your mission, you have an opportunity to provide value to an audience of potential customers. When you make an impact on that audience, you position yourself as a resource, and that audience can then come and find you for more value. The podcast platform is the perfect stage for telling your brand story, and the listeners and consumers of those podcasts are looking for value, they're looking for information, they're looking for education, they're looking for entertainment. If you can provide any or all of those factors, they're going to want more from you. So building yourself as a value-driven guest on shows that are relevant to your space can help your brand grow in a tremendous way. So let's talk about optimization for a moment. What does podcast guest optimization mean? It's very simple. If you're fully prepared for what you need to do when you arrive for any podcast interview, and you know how to make a significant impact that's going to lead to results for everybody involved, you are optimized. You are fully prepared to have a victory from your interview. Now, going into it just thinking that you're going to turn on the microphone and talk is really a haphazard approach that is not going to lead to results. If you're going into guest marketing with that mindset, you're not optimized. And you really have to think about the strategy that you want to put into play if you're going to get results from your guest marketing campaigns. When you are a fully optimized podcast guest and you connect with podcasters that align with your mission and your message, you have an opportunity for so much synergy and so much magic to happen that listeners won't be able to turn the show off. And that's the idea. You want to collaborate to make impactful, valuable content that's going to keep people coming back. When you do that and you're an active contributor to that type of content creation, everybody wins across the board. The podcasters win because they're making content that their listeners want, and ultimately that's going to make their content recommendable, which will thus make their audience grow. The audience wins because when they tune in to hear that content, they're impacted. They feel the value. They feel that message resonate through their body. It makes them want to take action, and that's going to make them want to come back to the show. that means they found a new podcast that they know will serve as a resource, because obviously this podcast producer brings on quality guests that speak directly to them and they care about the impact that they make. And lastly, you win because you've positioned yourself as a resource and somebody that they need to follow. One of the biggest things you need to remember when it comes to being a quality podcast guest is your job is not to sell. Do not arrive on any podcast thinking that you're going into sales mode. That's not what you're there for. That's not why the host of that podcast brought you on as a guest. They brought you on because you're a thought leader. They brought you on because you're an authority. They brought you on because you're knowledgeable in the subject matter at hand. If you just go into sales mode, the listeners are going to think they tuned into an infomercial. The hosts are going to be pissed off that they wasted their time bringing you on, and at the end of the day, nobody's going to win. In many cases, a lot of those listeners may turn off that podcast for good, and now that podcast won't grow as fast. Your job is to show up and provide value. Speak intelligently about the subject at hand. If it's in your space, if it's your passion, if it's something that you know frontwards and backwards, then of course you're going to be able to talk about it passionately. More than likely, you could do that if 0 people were listening to you. So show off what you know. Position yourself as somebody that people need to be following. Build your relevancy by being a value-driven guest versus being an overbearing salesperson. When you maximize the power of podcast guest marketing, the opportunities that open up for you are enormous. There are so many things that can be accomplished just by being a value-driven podcast guest. The beautiful thing about this is the more interviews you do and the more guest appearances you make, the more comfortable you're going to get telling your brand story and ultimately conversing with the person on the other end of the microphone. This is going to make you a very sought-after, in-demand guest. And as you continue to grow that reputation, you're going to obviously grow your circle, but you're also going to put yourself in a position to do a number of great things for your brand, including positioning yourself as an authority and a thought leader in your space, growing your know, like, and trust factor, amplifying your message to your target audience on a global scale, increasing the size of your network, connecting with like-minded people to discuss topics that you're passionate about. You can welcome new people into your ecosystem just by being a quality podcast guest. Creating fresh opportunities for customer and client acquisition. You can collaboratively create evergreen content that can serve your brand for years. You get the opportunity to sell without selling, and you can generate backlinks from the highly authoritative websites of these podcasts. So what are some of the important things to know about podcast guest marketing? Well, first of all, one of the big things to know is this isn't just turning on a microphone and talking. You need to understand what you're doing this for. So you have to establish some goals, and you have to have realistic expectations of what this platform can deliver for you. As I mentioned before, making sure that the shows that you look for align with your mission and your message and are relevant to your niche is going to be a critical factor in finding success in this space. Let's say you're a financial advisor. Would it make any sense for you to go on a podcast about fly fishing? Probably not. Now, you may be able to communicate with some people that like fly fishing and are also very aware of what the market's doing, but overall, your target audience isn't listening to that podcast. Your objective would be to find podcasts that are relevant to what you do and who you are and how you can help. And finding podcasts in the financial space is going to serve you and your brand much more. So whatever your niche is, make sure that you're finding podcasts that are speaking to people in that space, because that's where your target audience lives. Another key factor to not get hung up on is the audience size. A lot of times in the podcasting space, you hear the word download numbers. Download numbers are nothing more than a vanity metric. They're not going to tell the story of what kind of impact you can make. If you go on a podcast that's got thousands and thousands of listeners but isn't a defined audience, the likelihood of you coming out of that interview with big results is pretty minimal. But if you go on a podcast that has a very small but tightly defined audience that's there for a specific purpose, you have better chances to make impacts on audiences of that size and of that nature, because they're there for a reason. And as that audience grows, your message is going to be part of that portfolio. So as more listeners come in for that specific content, you're a part of that ecosystem. Therefore, you have an opportunity to continue your impact and value months, even years down the road. That is the beauty of evergreen content. And there's also a few quote-unquote ninja strategies that you can implement. Having a unique call to action that sends people to one specific page on your website that is dedicated for your appearance on that podcast is a great way to gauge traffic coming from that podcast. If you give them a link and you have it set up to where that's the only place you share that link, you can get an idea of how many people listen to that show and were impacted by your message by how many come over to that page on your website and follow the call to action that you leave them, whether it's to sign up for an email newsletter or take advantage of a giveaway or follow you on social media, whatever the case may be. Doing something like that is going to allow you to track your progress. So make sure that you have a unique call to action and you're actually speaking directly to that specific audience with it. That way, when they come over to your site, you know where they came from. One of the big things to remember about podcast guest marketing, it's just like anything else that you do. If you do it with consistency and you do it with a plan of action, your results are going to show. If you do it in a haphazard fashion and you decide maybe you'll do one interview this week and then do one next month and you really aren't targeted on where you're headed and which show is going to have you on as a guest, chances are this isn't going to work for you. So you want to make sure that you have a plan of action in place, and whatever that plan is, you're executing it with consistency. And a big thing to keep in mind, this is fun. It is a blast to connect with people in your space and have kick-ass conversations that impact everybody that's involved. It impacts you, it impacts the guests, it impacts the audience, and all you have to do is talk about what you're passionate about. That is a tremendous way to build your brand, is it not? Show up, make an impact, provide value, have a great conversation, and everything else falls into place. There's not a lot of platforms out there that allow you to do that. So positioning yourself as a value-driven podcast guest is going to open up a world of opportunities for you and your brand, as long as you execute it properly. If you want to up your game in the podcast guest marketing space, I highly recommend you pick up my free guide, which you can link to below. It's called 10 Tips for Becoming a Valuable, Fully Optimized Podcast Guest. There is a lot of tips and strategies and checklists in that guide that are going to help you understand what it means to be a fully optimized, value-driven podcast guest. So go pick that up and take advantage of everything you'll find within those pages. So that's going to do it for today's video. If you like what you saw, please subscribe and click the bell so you're the first to know when new videos go live each week. Also, click that like button so more people can find this content in the algorithm. My name is Jason Sircone. I'm on a mission to bring clarity and purpose to podcast guest marketing with this channel, and I'm glad you're along for the ride. While you're here, check out this video where I'm talking about 8 ways that podcast guest marketing can fuel your brand growth for years to come. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.